Republican Speaker Mike Johnson recently fled to Florida to hold a ridiculous joint press conference with Donald Trump about quote-unquote election integrity. And when asked to react to this, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin torched Trump, Johnson, and the Republican Party's war on democracy, and it was glorious. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, so we have a couple of clips to play in this video, and actually three. Two of them are with Jamie Raskin, who's just one of the best. He's one of the best rhetoricians and debaters and constitutional scholars in the Democratic Party. I'd love to see him run for president one day. And one of Eric Swalwell, who is also very, very good. But here is the situation. Here's the context. On Friday, Republican Speaker Mike Johnson, the most powerful elected Republican in the United States, at least on paper, went down to Mar-a-Lago to hold a press conference with Donald Trump, who holds no office, but he is the cult leader of the GOP, so he is Mike Johnson's boss. And the press conference, the whole thing was ridiculous, and it was really multi-purpose. Number one, it was an excuse for Johnson to go huddle up to Trump, given that Johnson is currently being threatened by Marjorie Taylor Greene, another Trump cultist. We did a video about this. It's also a virtue signal, right, to appease Trump, who won't shut up about elections, even when they're safe and secure. He just doesn't like losing. And just the whole thing was absolutely absurd, right? So in the press conference, Johnson's like, listen, we're going to propose legislation to make it illegal for undocumented migrants to vote in federal elections, which is a good idea, except it's already a matter of federal law, and Johnson knows this. It is a solution in search of a problem, because the Right-Wing Heritage Foundation has been tracking this stuff for years, and they've only found about 80 documented instances of undocumented migrants trying to vote in federal elections, 80 in 20 years. So it's a fraction of 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 a fraction that would be statistically significant enough to swing the outcome of a federal election. So again, a solution in search of a problem. But then, of course, you have the irony that these two men, Johnson and Trump, actually conspired in 2020 to steal a free and fair election. Irony of ironies. So with that context, Congressman Raskin was asked to react, and this is what he had to say.
I don't even know how else to start other than when you were watching, if you watched, or if you saw clips of Mike Johnson standing next to Donald Trump spouting lies about election integrity. What was going through your head?
Well, it reminded me of Kevin McCarthy's journey south to Mar-a-Lago, the $18 million palatial home Trump was bragging about. Where he was on bended knee begging for Trump's support in raising money. Johnson is on life support in the House because under the MAGA rules, anybody can move to vacate the chair and basically topple the leadership just by unilateral direction. So Marjorie Taylor Greene can do it, Matt Gaetz can do it, Jim Jordan can do it. And so Trump likes having Johnson over the barrel because he controls him. And so, for example, on Ukraine aid, which is so central, Trump can keep Johnson from bringing Ukraine to the floor. We are begging Johnson to bring Ukraine
and it would pass.
aid to the vote. It would pass overwhelmingly with 60 or 70% of the votes. And so it means that Donald Trump is basically steering the bus. And of course, the person who's steering Donald Trump is Vladimir Putin. It's like Trump is the fourth branch of government and Putin's the fifth branch of government. And the Republicans can't do anything unless Trump approves it, and Trump can't do anything if his friend Vladimir Putin doesn't want him to.
Again, love that. Under Republican rule or with a Republican House majority, Donald Trump is the de facto fourth branch of government and Vladimir Putin is the de facto fifth branch of government. Absolutely true. And again, before I play the next clip in which Raskin goes into the potential future threat that Johnson and Republicans hold to the outcome of the 2024 election, I want to remind you of what Johnson did to try to help Trump steal the 2020 election. Okay. Johnson carved out an influential role after the 2020 election, helping Trump's attempts to subvert the will of the people and overturn the legitimate results. Many of his actions took place behind the scenes or didn't break through beyond his Louisiana district, while more prominent pro-Trump figures soaked up the post-election attention. Like many Republicans, he questioned the legitimacy of Biden's victory and raised concerns about the expansion of mail-in voting during the pandemic. His gripes echoed longstanding garden-variety GOP complaints about mail-in voting, which largely ignore the reality that there is a staggeringly tiny level of fraud in U.S. elections. But he also promoted perhaps the most far-fetched conspiracy theory bouncing around the time, that two voting technology companies, Smartmatic and Dominion Voting, flipped millions of votes from Trump to Biden as part of an international plot. The allegations about these voting machines, some of them being rigged with the software by Dominion, there's a lot of merit to it, Johnson told a Louisiana radio station in November 2020, adding that there was a software system that was used all around the country that is suspect because it came from Hugo Chavez's Venezuela. These claims were false. Johnson also claimed that in Georgia it was really rigged because the system is set up for massive fraud, even though Republican officials oversaw 3 statewide tallies that confirmed Biden's razor-thin victory and did not uncover systemic irregularities. He recruited a majority of House Republicans to endorse a Trump-backed lawsuit seeking to invalidate the results from 4 key states that Trump lost: Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The Supreme Court swiftly rejected the case. The legal brief that Johnson submitted along with 125 of his fellow House Republicans claimed that unconstitutional irregularities involved in the 2020 presidential election cast doubt on its outcome and the integrity of the American system of elections. Okay, Johnson voted for the objection after January 6th, after the insurrection, folks. Republicans objected to Democratic electors from Arizona and Pennsylvania. Johnson voted for the objection. Okay. So the list goes on and on. I'll remind you that those lies, by the way, that Johnson spread about Dominion voting, when Fox News signal boosted those lies, they had to pay an $800 million defamation settlement because that is how meritless the claims were. And they were just knowingly false. Johnson aided and abetted Donald Trump's attempts to steal the election. So really, if you wanted to protect elections and the security of elections, you would want to protect them from Donald Trump and Mike Johnson. Irony of ironies, which gets us to the potential threat that a Johnson and Trump-led Republican Party may pose to future elections, say the 2024 election. And Congressman Raskin was asked about that, and this is what he had to say.
I'm sure you get asked this a lot. So to calm people's nerves out there who are paying attention to this and saw Mike Johnson and Donald Trump standing next to each other, I mean, there have been changes to the Electoral Count Act to put into place some important measures. But for people who are freaked out, like Mike Johnson's the Speaker of the House. He clearly is standing by Trump and is willing to help him challenge the outcome of the election. What do you tell them?
Well, first of all, Vice President Harris is vice president and not Pence or Pence's substitute. Remember, they were going to try to just oust Pence and put somebody else in there. So that helps. It's an extremely narrow majority that they have. It's basically a 1 or 2 vote majority at this point. Who knows? It could flip before then. But they would basically need to get every Republican to try to vote against a legitimate electoral college majority and start rejecting electoral college votes, which is what they did last time. But we're taking every permutation very seriously and preparing for all of it because, look, they tried fraud in 2020. They tried violence in 2020. They tried deceit. They tried coercion. They tried duress. They tried everything. We've got to be ready for every category of attack on the election, because we know the vast majority of the people are on the side of democracy and the Democracy Party. Joe Biden beat him by 7.5 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. We're adding 10 or 12 million new young voters in 2024. And if we do our job right, it will be an even bigger margin in 2024. But we've got to defend the election.
I'm sure you get.
Again, absolutely correct, because here's the reality. I am also concerned about what the Republican Party might do in the outcome of the 2024 election. This idea that it's guaranteed that if President Biden wins, and right now that is not guaranteed, even if he were to win, right, we have a bad faith Republican majority in the House of Representatives. We also talked about in a previous video how one of RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s official campaign advisors, a high-ranking member of his campaign, is also concocting this scheme to try to deprive President Biden of an electoral college victory by throwing it to the House of Representatives. And as she said, because the composition of the House of Representatives, if it were to be deferred to the House of Representatives, they would ultimately just vote for Donald Trump, right? So there are so many bad faith attempts by the GOP that I myself am concerned, even with the provisions that have been added, the clarification that were added to the Electoral Count Act, in the aftermath of January 6th. So, folks, this is why Liz Cheney, a former Republican congresswoman who voted with Donald Trump 93% of the time, why she said it's not enough to just defeat Trump in the 2024 presidential election. You also have to keep the Trump-era Republican Party away from all levers of power. You have to keep them out of the House majority. You have to keep them away from the Senate majority, because if you give them an inch, they will take a mile in bad faith in a very fascistic, authoritarian way to undermine democracy. I'll also say that Eric Swalwell was asked to comment on this joint press conference, another Democratic congressman, between Mike Johnson and Donald Trump, and he had a really funny one-liner.
Spare me, Anderson. I mean, it's too rich that Donald Trump and Mike Johnson are talking to us about election integrity. That's like having to listen to a lecture by Bonnie and Clyde on bank security. I mean, it's absurd considering what they did in the 2020 election to try and overturn it.
100%. Absolutely. I'll also point out that I recently interviewed Congressman Dan Goldman, Jamie Raskin, and Eric Swalwell's colleague about, and part of the conversation rather, turned to Jamie Raskin. And Dan Goldman expressed his admiration here. We're going to play the clip. And again, I encourage you to check out that interview in its entirety on my channel. I'll also note that I think that it has had an energizing influence on previous classes of Democrats. So Congresswoman Cortez, Congressman Raskin, Jamie Raskin, who's the ranking member of the Oversight Committee. I mean, AOC has always been a fighter, and I love that too, but it seems to have, continued her invigoration. Congressman Raskin, who, is a preeminent constitutional scholar. He's an amazing rhetorician. I've seen more aggression from him as well, and it's been a welcome sight. It's almost like you all, maybe I'm wrong. Is it like a feeding off each other sort of thing? Do you feel like you all raise each other's games?
I hesitate to say that we are influencing Ranking Member Raskin, who is one of the finest members of Congress, is the leader of the Oversight Committee, and has done a fabulous job in guiding us. We all very much look up to him and rely upon him, and his staff is excellent, and they help us a lot.